Have you ever noticed how the most sensitive people in your life, the ones who really saw beyond the surface, gradually fell silent? Maybe it was that friend who always noticed details that others ignored, who saw the sadness hidden behind forced smiles, who questioned things that everyone accepted without thinking. Or maybe it's you yourself, feeling that your voice grows weaker every day, that your deepest insights find less echo in the world around you. It is as if there were an invisible force sucking the lucidity from the most awakened souls, leaving behind a frightening void where there were once essential questions and observations that cut straight to the heart of truth. Franz Kafka knew this when he wrote about characters who found themselves trapped in incomprehensible labyrinths, being transformed into creatures that no one else could recognize or understand. This feeling of disappearing while everyone around continues their lives as if nothing has changed is one of the loneliest and most distressing experiences an awakened consciousness can face. If you are feeling this profound disconnection, this feeling that your lucidity is being swallowed by the general silence, I want you to know that you have found a space where this is not only understood, but valued. This channel exists for those who refuse to accept shallow answers to deep questions, for those who feel they are seeing realities that others prefer to ignore. When you sign up here, you're not just pushing a button, you're joining a community of souls who share this experience of awakening in a world that seems increasingly dormant. It's a place where your sensitivity is not seen as weakness, but as the strength it truly is. And if this content is touching something inside you, leave a like, so more people can find this refuge of genuine understanding. Together, we can break the silence that tries to isolate us. Lucidity, that rare ability to see beyond the smoke screens that society puts up to keep us busy and distracted, has always been a dangerous gift. Kafka understood this better than anyone, because he lived the experience of being an acute conscience, navigating a world that prefers dormancy to awakening. When we look around us, we realize that the most authentic voices, those that asked uncomfortable questions, that pointed out inconsistencies in the systems that everyone accepted as normal, were gradually being silenced. Not by explicit censorship, but by something much more subtle and frightening, a type of erasure that happens when the social structure itself automatically rejects anything that threatens its superficial stability. It is as if there were an invisible algorithm working in the collective consciousness, identifying and isolating those who have the ability to see beyond the veil of appearances. And the cruelest thing about it all is that this process happens so gradually that when we finally realize it, we are practically invisible, our words echoing in the void, our perceptions being discarded as excesses of sensitivity or unnecessary pessimism. This phenomenon is not accidental. There is an economy of silence that works perfectly behind the scenes of our civilization. Lucid souls are naturally disruptive because they can't pretend they don't see what's happening. They perceive contradictions, feel injustices that others can ignore, identify toxic patterns that repeat themselves in endless cycles. Kafka described this through his characters who woke up transformed into insects or got lost in incomprehensible bureaucracies. It was his way of showing how lucidity can become a curse in a world that works based on the collective denial of the deepest reality. When you are able to see that the emperor is naked, you automatically become a threat to all those who chose to believe in non-existent clothes. And the system's response is not violent or dramatic. It is simply ignoring you until you begin to doubt your own perception, until you feel so isolated that you prefer to remain silent rather than continue to be seen as the one who exaggerates, who dramatizes, who sees problems where there are none. The silence that Kafka feared so much is not just the absence of sound, it is the absence of recognition, of validation, of space for truth to exist. It's that feeling of shouting in an aquarium, where your words are completely muffled by the glass that separates you from the outside world. People outside may see you moving your lips, but they can't or won't hear what you're trying to communicate. And little by little, you will lose the strength to keep trying, because the effort to be understood becomes greater than your ability to resist general indifference. This is how the most lucid souls disappear, not in a dramatic event, but in a slow process of erosion, where each day that passes, you feel a little less real, a little less able to affect the world around you. And when you finally realize what happened, you realize that you have become a kind of ghost, physically present but invisible in all the other dimensions that really matter to the genuine human experience. And have you ever felt this sensation of becoming invisible as your lucidity increases? That moment when you realize that your most profound observations are not echoed, that your essential questions are met with blank stares or changes of subject. If you are experiencing this right now, if you recognize this experience of isolation that comes along with awakening, leave this simple sentence in the comments. I see beyond the silence. Your courage to speak up may be exactly the validation another clear-headed soul needs today to not give up on their own perception. Sometimes knowing that we are not alone in this experience makes all the difference between continuing to fight for our authenticity or surrendering to the dangerous comfort of collective unconsciousness. The Kafkaesque transformation that Kafka described in his works was not just a literary metaphor, it was a prophecy about what happens to awakened consciousnesses in systems that depend on dormancy to function. Gregor Samsa, waking up transformed into an insect, is no different than a lucid soul, waking up one day and realizing that he has become incomprehensible to everyone around him. Gregor's family could no longer relate to him, not because he had necessarily become worse, but because his new way of existing no longer fit the standards they knew and expected. This is what happens to us when we begin to see realities that challenge the official version of life that everyone has agreed to accept. Our lucidity turns us into strange beings in the eyes of those who prefer to keep their eyes closed, and this strangeness gradually pushes us to the margins of social experience until we find ourselves living in closed rooms, fueled by the pity of those who don't understand us, but still feel some kind of moral obligation to keep us alive. The process of disappearance of lucid souls always follows the same pattern. First comes the solitary questioning, those moments when you wonder if you're really seeing the right things or if your perception is distorted. Then comes the attempt to share your observations, hoping to find confirmation or at least genuine dialogue about what you're noticing. But the answers you get are always variations on the same theme. You're thinking too much, you're complicating simple things, you should focus on more positive aspects of life. It is as if there is a universal conspiracy to keep everything on the surface, to avoid any deeper dive into the murky waters of authentic reality. And when you insist, when you keep pointing out elephants in the room that no one wants to acknowledge, you begin to notice that people subtly withdraw, that your social invitations diminish, that your opinions are listened to with condescending tolerance, but never really taken seriously. That's when true isolation begins, not physical isolation, but the much more painful one that happens when you're surrounded by people who can't or won't connect with who you really are. Kafka knew that authentic lucidity always carries with it an inevitable dose of anguish, because seeing clearly also means seeing the limitations, the contradictions, the dark aspects that we prefer to keep hidden even from ourselves. A lucid soul does not have the luxury of denial, cannot simply turn off perception when reality becomes too uncomfortable. It's like having a superpower that you can't control, that's always working even when you wish you could have a moment's respite from the intensity of what you're perceiving. And perhaps this is exactly why these souls tend to disappear, not because they are weak, but because carrying so much clarity in a world that runs on collective illusion is simply too exhausting to sustain indefinitely. They withdraw not by choice, but by the need for preservation, like wounded animals looking for a dark corner where they can recover from excessive exposure to the raw light of truth. The silence surrounding this disappearance is perhaps the most frightening aspect of the entire process. No one announces that a lucid soul is withdrawing from the world. No one makes statements about the loss that this represents for the collective consciousness. They simply become less present, less willing to share their perceptions, less confident that it is worth trying to communicate what they are seeing. And the world continues to function as if nothing had changed, as if these voices had never existed, or as if their absence was natural and expected. It is a type of social death that happens in slow motion, where the person is still physically present, but their most authentic essence has been gradually suffocated by general indifference and incomprehension. Kafka described this phenomenon through characters who got lost in infinite bureaucratic labyrinths, where every attempt to communicate or make themselves understood resulted in more confusion and isolation. It was his way of showing how complex systems can devour sensitive individuals without leaving a trace, without even realizing that they are causing profound destruction. The loneliness of the lucid soul is not just the lack of company, it is the lack of recognition of one's own existence. It's like being on a radio frequency that no one else can tune into, transmitting important messages that simply get lost in the ether because there are no compatible receivers nearby. And the most painful thing is that these souls often have much to offer, precious insights that could help others navigate the complexity of human existence. But their ability to contribute is trapped by the inability to make genuine connections. It's like having a medicine for a collective illness, but not being able to find anyone willing to admit that they are sick. So they keep their persecutions to themselves, feeding a loneliness that deepens until they reach a point where they prefer silence to the constant pain of not being understood. And so the world gradually loses its most necessary voices, precisely those that could offer perspectives capable of breaking destructive cycles and pointing out more authentic paths of existence. When Kafka wrote about metamorphosis, about characters who wake up transformed into incomprehensible creatures, he was capturing something very real about the experience of consciousnesses that evolve beyond what their social environment can recognize or accept. Transformation is not always a choice. Sometimes it is an inevitable consequence of no longer being able to pretend that we don't see what we are seeing, that we don't feel what we are feeling. And once this transformation happens, there is no going back. There is no unseeing what was seen or unfeeling what was felt. It is as if the soul goes through a phase change, like water that turns into steam, maintaining the same essence but taking on a form that can no longer blend harmoniously with its previous state. And this new form, even though it is a natural and necessary evolution, becomes incompatible with the environment that previously seemed familiar and welcoming. People who used to relate to us naturally now no longer know how to approach us, as if there were an invisible glass separating us that allows mutual observation but prevents genuine touch. The tragedy of lucid souls who disappear is that they take with them not only their own perceptions, but also the possibility that others may awaken through contact with their lucidity. It's like when a candle goes out in a dark room. The absence of its light not only affects the space it directly illuminated, but also diminishes the ability of other nearby candles to find their own flame. There is a collective dimension to individual lucidity that we lose when these souls withdraw, a network of shared perception that fragments as its most sensitive nodes become disconnected. And perhaps this is the true tragedy that Kafka envisioned. Not just the individual suffering of isolated consciences, but the general impoverishment of a society that loses its ability to see beyond appearances because it has systematically eliminated those who possess this natural ability. The paradox is that precisely when the world most needs lucid voices, perceptions capable of cutting through the layers of illusion and confusion that surround us, these voices tend to disappear with greater intensity. It is as if there were a perverse law that means that moments of greatest crisis are also moments of greatest silencing of those who could offer clarity. Perhaps it is because systems out of balance become even more hostile to anything that threatens their precarious stability. Or perhaps it is because sensitive souls feel chaos with an intensity that burdens them beyond their capacity to resist. Either way, the result is always the same. Just when we would most need lighthouses to guide us through the storm, we discover that many of them have gone out, leaving us sailing blindly in increasingly turbulent waters. And the silence that sets in is not only the absence of these voices, but also the absence of the possibility that new, similar voices will find the courage to speak out, because there are no longer visible examples that it is possible to be lucid and survive socially at the same time. But perhaps the answer lies not in lamenting the disappearance of these souls, but in understanding that their removal can be a form of preservation, a survival strategy that allows their lucidity to be kept alive even when it cannot be expressed publicly. Like seeds that are buried deeply during the winter so that they can sprout again when conditions become favorable, these consciousnesses may be going through a necessary period of latency, preserving their essence for a future time when the world is more ready to receive what they have to offer. And our responsibility as those who perceive this phenomenon may be to create the conditions for this moment to come sooner, cultivating spaces where lucidity can exist without being penalized, where depth can be valued rather than feared, where questioning is seen as a contribution rather than a threat. Perhaps this is how we can honor both the souls who have withdrawn and those who still struggle to keep their authenticity alive in a world that prefers surface to depth, comfort to truth, silence to the courage to see and speak about what really matters.